Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break and were able to check out some of the tech labs. I would like to introduce you to Liezl Zwarts, a profound and prolific artist, in my personal opinion. Welcome to Unleashing Creativity Within Constraints, Finding Opportunity Through Limitation. Don't forget to join the discussion in the chat tab and use the Q&A box for any questions you have throughout the session. And it is off to you. Thank you so much for being here, Liezl.
Thanks, Barry. Okay. Make sure I'm good here. Okay. It was 6 a.m. on the 7th of May, 2011, and I was walking down the cobblestone streets in Soho, New York, on my way to Salt Studios where I was working at the time. And I remember it was the most beautiful spring morning and the streets were completely deserted, when I suddenly felt something hit me, or felt like something hit me in my chest. It was such a strong, almost physical feeling that I had to go sit on the sidewalk right then and there. I had this epiphany that I've arrived at a crossroads in my life, and the enormity of it was soul-destroying. I had to choose between my husband and myself. I either had to leave my husband of 9 years at the time, and I could not even imagine doing that. I felt like I would literally die without him. Or I had to go on living the way that I was, where I felt like I've completely and utterly lost myself in this relationship. That there was absolutely nothing left of me inside. And that if I chose to stay with him, that the heart and soul of who I am would completely die, whatever was left of it. And that would continue to be my life. There's the most beautiful quote by 17th century Japanese poet and samurai, Mizuta Masahida. My barn, having burnt to the ground, I can now see the moon. Let's put a pin in that and get back to that later. I'd like to share with you a personal perspective on creativity. Creativity is defined as the tendency to generate or recognize ideas, alternatives, or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems. There's nothing in this definition that says artist, musician, photographer, or sculptor. So in essence, if you are solving problems and thinking of ideas, you are creative. And the thing with creativity is that it's tainted with expressions like think outside the box, the canvas is yours to fill, color outside the lines. How many of you here today have felt like the more work you do, the less creative you become and the less room you have to play? That there's this disconnect between the work that you do and the creativity that excites you and motivates you. That you feel confined or restricted by the briefs that you receive. By the end of our time today, I would like to leave you with 3 underlying principles of creativity within constraints to help you find the opportunities within limitations. And my hope is that this will help you not only professionally, but perhaps personally as well. The 3 underlying principles are who, what, and where. But more on that a bit later. A couple of years ago, I did a job for a client. It was possibly one of the hardest shoots that I've ever had to do. I was actually really excited about it until a couple of days before the shoot, when we found out that there's been budget cuts. Same expectations, but with considerably less money. Let's be honest, we've all been there before. So we had to try to replicate what we proposed, which was an outdoor multiple location shoot to an in-studio shoot. Secondly, there was no room for error. The brief changed, but the deadline stayed the same. There was also so many differing opinions to appease, and the agency and their team were not aligned. The one person would say yes, the other person would say no, and no one seemed to take our artistic advice into consideration. It felt like there was this consistent tug of war with the constraints of the brief and making sure that I do something that I am proud of. In the end, the outcome was a success from the client's point of view, but from my point of view, it was not. I was nowhere in those images. I was not only frustrated, but I was so disappointed with myself. How can I do work that I don't want other people to see, or that I don't want to put on my website? And I questioned where it went wrong. Was it them? Was it me? And also, why did this bother me so much? Because the client was happy in the end. So upon deep reflection, I realized a few things. Firstly, the customer was right. There is always going to be the restrictions, limitations, money and resources, time, and things that are out of our control. What is big in my world is not big in theirs. It is me behind the lens and them in front of their customers. Secondly, it is my responsibility to find my artistic expression within the brief. It is no longer about thinking outside the box, but rather I needed to think inside the box. And once I realized that, the constraints of the briefs that followed piqued my creativity. I was no longer getting it in spite of my work, but because of it. And thirdly, I realized that there was a deeper reason why I was so protective over my artistic expression. And it was because for the first time and for a very long time, it was the only thing that was actually mine. I'm going to elaborate a bit more on what I told you right at the beginning of my talk. In 2008, I moved to New York with my ex-husband. I'll paint this picture for you. New country, failing marriage, no work visa, so I couldn't work. No support structure, no friends, no family. I've never felt more alone in my entire life. I was sitting at home for the first 2 months, being depressed, feeling lonely, and I eventually decided I might as well try and find an internship or start assisting for free rather than just sitting at home. I eventually ended up working for incredible photographers like Sante D'Orazio, and also a photography pair that I would rather not name, who made me scrub their toilets, amongst other things. After more than a year, I finally found a job as an assistant, a photography assistant and a studio manager with an incredible photographer who became like a mentor to me. I was still working for free though, and I was working 12 to 16-hour days, sometimes 7 days a week. And I did this for 4 years until I finally got my green card. I worked myself into a coma because of trying to escape this heartbreak and this constant anger that I was feeling in my marriage. This, over time, the long hours, my crumbling marriage took its toll on my health. I lost almost all of my hair. Anyone that's been through this knows how traumatizing it is. And dealt with this mystery illness. I stopped counting the amount of doctors, specialists, homeopaths, naturopaths, kinesiologists, dietitians, and treatments that I tried. No one could tell me what was wrong with me, and I wasn't getting any better. And when I thought I was at rock bottom, I realized that rock bottom had a basement. At the end of 2014, when I finally left my job to pursue my dream to shoot and not just assist. But at that point, my marriage finally crumbled. And I was husbandless, jobless, and I needed to find a place to stay with no income in New York City. I managed to rent a room in an apartment with a French friend of mine. She was also dealing with her own heartbreak at the time, and I remember we were sitting on her fire escape every night, overlooking the rooftops of Williamsburg, drinking red wine and chain smoking our problems away. It didn't really help, but at the time it did. Every day I struggled to get out of bed, but I made myself get out of bed because I knew that if I didn't, it would be the end. So every morning I got out of bed, that day and the next day and the next. I had to pay my bills, so I had to hustle really, really hard. It was at this time that I started shooting again and using this as an outlet for this pain that I was experiencing. I managed to build up a really strong portfolio of work. I poured my pain and my suffering into these images, but little did I know that all of this would become the catalyst for me getting my first agent. I did this for 2 years after my divorce, and I started building my life back up again and slowly climbing out of this basement. When at the time, I had the strongest feeling that I should go back to South Africa. I felt like the work that I would do in South Africa would get me work in New York, and here we are. The reason I'm telling you all of this is to explain to you why I'm so protective of my artistic expression. Because my photography, which was self-taught and a real struggle, was 100% mine. The constraints of my life birthed this gift that I am so incredibly grateful for. Leonardo da Vinci said it perfectly. Art lives from constraint and dies from freedom. I see that now, not just in myself and in my work and my personal life, but also in other artists. Benin Lataya, an incredible and world-renowned awarded collage artist, was constrained by having no money and no resources. He used to collect scrap paper from other people's trash, and he would tear that into little pieces and separate it into colors and use that as his palette to create a work of art. He would then take that piece of art and sell it in order to buy more supplies for his next piece. He built his career up from people's trash to auctioning his work for tens of thousands of dollars. He turned his scarcity into abundance. Unlike Benin, Phil Hansen, a pointillist artist, had all the resources at his fingertips, so to speak. He was really gaining momentum in his career until something happened that was completely out of his control. He developed a tremor in his drawing hand. He tried so hard. The more his hand trembled, the tighter he held his pencil, and the dots started looking like tadpoles, so eventually he just gave up. But the passion to create was always there, and it didn't go away, and he eventually decided to go see a neurologist. The neurologist told him that he had nerve damage that couldn't be fixed. But you know what else this doctor told him? He said to him, "Embrace the shake." And he did. He now has such a unique style that is his and only his. He's not only a multimedia artist, but he's also become an author, a speaker, and an innovator. His creativity flowed from constraints that was out of his control. Speaking of things out of control, film director Robert Rodriguez had 2 weeks and $7,000 to film his first feature film, El Mariachi. Parkinson's law states that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Rodriguez demonstrated this beautifully. To save time, he avoided elaborate setups, only did single takes, he did practical effects in real locations, and he even incorporated mistakes into his story. He also edited his film himself, allowing for immediate feedback. El Mariachi was recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the lowest budgeted film ever to gross more than $1 million. In fact, it grossed over $2 million. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Human Science investigated the brain activity and network dynamics associated with creative constraints and found that constraints enhance creative cognition. The point I'm making here is that constraints, which has been painted as negative, is actually a catalyst for creativity. We've been told that creativity is thinking outside the box, working from a blank canvas, and not being confined by lines. But what about looking at it with a different lens? The brief is not a set of restrictions, but rather a framework, and we need to find the freedom within that framework. How do we think inside the box, join the dots on the canvas, and color inside the lines to create something beautiful? How do we let the constraints catalyze our creativity? I have done this by utilizing 3 underlying principles of creativity within constraints: who, what, and where. Number 1, define who you are. Number 2, define what you are willing to say no to. And number 3, define where you and your client intersect in the brief. Let me take you through each one. Number 1 is who. Define who you are. This is about understanding you as a creative and what is uniquely you. I absolutely love this quote by Naira Wahid. I am mine before I am ever anyone else's. You need to ask yourself what lies at the heart of your creativity. Within my photography, I strive to capture the essence of what it means to be human and invite the viewer to appreciate the profound beauty concealed within the stillness and resilience of the human body. In the human form, I see stories untold. Skin, form, shapes, and shadows all whisper tales of a life lived. My second point is define what you are willing to say no to. I love this quote by Howard Mann. You are not defined by what you say yes to, but what you say no to. A huge part of finding what lies at the heart of your creativity is where you are willing to draw the line. For me, my no is when the brief is too open-ended and they haven't clearly defined what it is they want. There's this great scene in Alice in Wonderland where Alice is lost and the Cheshire Cat appears. And she asks for directions and the Cheshire Cat says, well, where do you want to go? And Alice replies, well, I don't know. And the Cheshire Cat says, well, if you don't know where you are going, any road will do. So for me, when the brief is too open-ended with no clear direction, it gets really messy. I will also only be hired for my work and not in spite of it. Number 3 is where. Define where you and your client intersect in the brief. This is the intersection between you, who you are as a creative, and the brief from the client. Both parties need to stay true to their objective, and it's important to find that intersection together. At the end of the project, if I remove their logo, it must feel like my work, and when I add their logo, it must feel like theirs. I'm going to share with you a few examples of my personal experience with creativity within constraints. I'm going to show you 2 images first. As I show you these images, I'd like you to imagine or guess which one was a personal shoot that I did and which was for a client. For me, both of these feel personal, and this is what I strive for whenever I shoot for a client. But in this case, A was for a retail client and B was for a personal shoot. Let's talk about A. The constraints in the case of this shoot was the incredible amount of garments, shoes, and jewelry we had to shoot in a certain amount of time. When I need to capture this many shots, I sometimes feel like I'm on autopilot, and I don't necessarily have the luxury to try and tap into the heart of my creativity. The selection process of the final images to be used is where the client and I intersected in this case. The images I choose are the ones that best represent me and my standard of creativity, but also show the clothing or shoes or jewelry that the client needs to see in these images. Again, at the end of the project, if I remove their logo, it must feel like mine. And when I add their logo, it must feel like theirs. The next project I'm going to share with you is a shoot that I did for Nike. We had the constraints of time. We were on the last shot of the day, and in general, it takes a couple of hours to do a proper lighting setup. We had 3 minutes exactly before we needed to be out of this location. So here we were, 3 minutes on the clock, and no lighting setup, and I was freaking out, to say the least. But a beautiful thing happened. Everyone pitched in. And a special shout out goes to my assistant, who was the one that actually came up with the genius suggestion of how to do the lighting within this constraints of our time that we had. And it ended up being an absolute success. The point that I'm making is that when you hit that intersection, it becomes one job, one team, no tug of war. Everyone is on the same page, and it's a shared victory. I have one more example of what I mean by finding that intersection, and that's this project here. I had to shoot this on the back of TVC because of budget constraints again. This means that the TV commercial takes priority. And even though I'm there to shoot a full-on stills campaign, I generally only get 5 minutes, if I'm lucky, after each take to get my shot. What makes it even more difficult is I don't have any time to do my own lighting setup, so I have to rely on the lighting setup that the video guys did, which generally is not good for stills because they generally light it beautiful and moody, and stills cameras need more light than video. So overall, this creates an incredible amount of pressure for the stills photographer. So I go back to who am I? What do I want my images to look like, and how can I take these constraints and still create something that I love and the client loves? In this case, I asked my assistant to handhold a light and asked the models to lean right into my lens just to create something a little bit more different. The client wanted to see the devices, the phones, all TVs and remotes, and I needed to make the shots look good, and these are the outcome. These images are the outcome. Lastly, I want to share with you a personal project that is very, very close to my heart, and a celebration of the constraints of my life that catalyzed my creativity. It is called Hope is a Whisper. Kintsugi is a Japanese art form that translates to golden joinery. It is at the heart of my project. It involves mending broken pottery with lacquer mixed with golden powder, creating something that is more beautiful and valuable than before. It is a powerful metaphor for the resilience and transformation, and it is a symbol that I have incorporated into my photography project. This is an ongoing series that I'm working on, inspired by my own experiences that I've shared with you earlier. I wanted to create something that could visually represent my story, my pain, but also my journey of healing and hope. The idea of photographing women who have survived trauma and emerged stronger was born from this desire to showcase the resilience and beauty that arise from brokenness. Just as Kintsugi celebrates the beauty of imperfection, my project celebrates the beauty of the scars and imperfection that makes each woman unique. The woman I photograph has their own unique story to tell, and it's my privilege to capture that story through my lens. It's my aspiration that these captured stories become a lifeline to others who might be in the midst of a very dark place. To remind them that our darkest times can birth a light that blinds the shadows. This project is a tribute to healing and hope, a testament that in the furnace of adversity, the human spirit is forged anew. Our cracks are what makes us exquisite. If you would like to see more of this project, or if you or someone that you know might have their own story of hardship and hope to tell, I would absolutely love for you to follow me on Instagram, Liezl Zwarts, or to reach out to me via email, liezl@liezlzwarts.com. I also hope that with everything I've shown you today, that you can see constraints with a different lens, the lens of opportunity, both professionally and personally. I absolutely love this quote by French-American artist and philosopher Marc Chagall. The master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence in whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he is always doing both. Don't settle for anything less, and remember who, what, and where. Who are you as a creative? What are you willing to say no to? And where is that intersection between you and your client's brief? There's this great question from the book Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, which is something I try and ask myself on a daily basis, and I would now like to ask you. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Now go and do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liezl. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your story. I have to admit, I am very honored to have known you for as long as I have, and just to see you
Yes.
evolve into who you are today. And it's
Thank
inspiring.
you. Thanks.
Absolutely. We do have a few questions here, so I'm just going to go in order. Looks like they're all from Anonymous.
Okay.
How do you balance needing to do client work and your own?
Sure. Client work obviously always comes first because I'm freelance and it's my bread and butter. But my personal work is really important to me, and whenever I have downtime, which as a freelancer sometimes happens for a month, or 2 months, and whenever I have that time, I try and work on my personal projects because, like I said earlier, I feel like my personal projects are what sometimes gets me work, and it's what got me my first agent. So obviously client work always gets first priority, but I really try to shoot personal work as often as I possibly can, especially since I started with this series, Hope is a Whisper. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does, yes. So we have 2 questions that look to be rather similar here. So I'm just going to, we'll start with this one. So how do you expand a client's creative understanding when their vision is perhaps uninspiring or devoid of creativity?
Sure.
That's a common question.
Yes. I think in the end it's just about, the client came to you because for a reason, right? For who you are and because of your work. And I think as long as you tread carefully and you do it in a very honest and, truthful way, I think a lot of clients are quite open to listening to what your suggestions and taking your advice. Obviously in the end they still have the final say, and I've obviously had this situation more than once, and like in the example that I gave where I said the shoot was a disaster, the client was happy, but I wasn't happy. That happens, and in that case, we really try to give me and my producer, when I say me, us. But we really try to give them our artistic advice, and they just didn't go for it. And in the end, it is what it is, and you can just try, I guess, while you're shooting, to try and bring your voice into it, and then hope that maybe they like that more than they liked what they originally asked for.
So, yeah, it's a matter of collaboration, communication,
Yeah.
the classics and everything. And hopefully, maybe that by choosing you or choosing the photographer, that's who gets to bring in some of that creativity and maybe some more of that inspiring.
And that they would trust you, because they asked you to do this for a reason. So yeah, that's all you can hope for. But it doesn't always happen.
As much as we wish it would, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we have time for one more question, and this is one that I personally would love to ask is, how do you arrive at the 3 principles of creativity? How did you come up with the who, what, and where?
Sure, that was a long process. So a couple of years ago, probably 2 years ago, it was January, and this year was ahead of me, and I felt so uninspired, and I was just not ready for the year. And I thought about why, and I realized this because a lot of the jobs that I did was not at the heart of who I am. You know, I just took these jobs for the sake of taking them. And I've been following this woman on Instagram for quite a while, and she's a strategist, and she helps photographers find their their why, like really find their why. And you know, why do you do what you do? And I ended up doing this. She calls it a boot camp, and I ended up doing this boot camp with her. And it was really full on. It was like 9 weeks. Like, it took up so much of my time. And at some point I was like, oh my word, I can't believe I did this. I don't have time. But to be honest with you, it really changed things for me, because I went there. Like, I sat down, you know, she asked questions and I would sit there and really think about it, questions that I've never thought of before. But, you know, I really went to look at what is my why, and why do I shoot? And it was from there that I started, like, getting, you know, like, working out all these principles and things that's really important to me, and that's how I eventually arrived at that point. But yeah, it took a lot of work and a lot of, like, introspection, and yeah, just looking at what I really want and what's important to me.
Amazing. I wish we could continue the conversation. I feel like we could
Me
talk
too.
about this all day. But we are at time. Thank you so very much for just being vulnerable and sharing your story with everyone here. There's been a lot of really wonderful feedback about your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry, and thanks for everyone for listening to me.
Wonderful. So now we are going to go ahead and take a short break before the final photo studio op session with the panel Exploring the Frontiers of Photo Studio Operations. Navigate to the lounge tab and join one of the tables to network with your fellow attendees. Or you can also go back to the agenda tab and check out some of the Tech Lab sessions, and we will see you shortly. Thank you so much.